Hi, welcome to another episode of The Dans. I'm Dan McKay. I'm a reporter with the Albuquerque Journal. I'm here with my colleague Dan Boyd, who's the Capitol Bureau Chief here at the Journal. So things are getting pretty crazy here at the Roundhouse. The lobbyists are getting desperate. You know it's important because anytime a lawmaker walks out of a meeting, immediately a lobbyist jumps on them and starts talking to them about their pet issue. There's definitely a lot of tension and a lot of activity right now. We're hitting the critical last 2 weeks of the session when the fate of bills really starts to become clear. One of the things we've been following really closely is the ethics legislation. This is a really complicated bill, and it has a lot of different policy decisions that have to be made. What's the latest on the ethics bill?
Yeah, there's actually two different bills. One of the bills introduced in the House is now headed to the House floor. It's made it through two committees. There's been a lot of changes along the way. In its current form, it would make the complaints public once they're found to kind of be valid. That's been something that a lot of open government groups have been pushing for. The Senate's going to have a hearing this weekend on a separate ethics commission bill. So there are kind of two competing pieces of legislation. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, and certainly with only a little over 2 weeks left, that it's going to be kind of racing the clock as well. So that's one key one we'll be keeping an eye on. Also, a tax bill came out of House Taxation and Revenue Committee this week that has a lot of people talking as well.
Yeah, so tax reform or tax overhaul has been a constant issue the last 3 or 4 years. Republicans had the upper hand, so to speak, when Governor Susana Martinez was in office, and they were pushing their own brand of tax reform, which would involve closing some loopholes, but also lowering the tax rate to keep everything revenue neutral. Well, now that Democrats control both chambers and the governor's office, they have their own tax changes that they're pursuing, and that includes increases in personal income tax rates, particularly for high earners. There's also an increase on tobacco products like cigarettes and e-cigarettes. And so there's sort of a very different kind of tax package moving through right now. We'll have to see how the governor feels about these issues. Michelle Lujan Grisham has weighed in on some parts of the proposal, right?
She said she likes some parts of it, kind of expanding a tax credit for working families, but kind of hasn't weighed in on other parts of the bill. I think it's been really compelling that it's really shown kind of a fundamental different philosophy about government. I mean, the Democrats say this kind of extra revenue is needed to bring more stable tax base and be able to make sure education spending that's in the budget is sustainable in future years. If oil prices were to go down, Republicans say, there's no need to do this right now, especially at a time when the state has a budget surplus and that it would hurt working families, which is something that Democrats dispute. So that's been kind of one of those real philosophical debates in the building.
We're also seeing a different kind of dynamic on some legislation. People who follow the news closely have probably noticed that there is sort of a growing rural-urban divide in New Mexico politics. Republican lawmakers from Albuquerque were almost entirely wiped out in the last election. So the cities in New Mexico are increasingly represented mostly or entirely by Democrats, and the Republican caucus is much more heavily weighted towards rural areas. But we're also seeing that some of the rural Democrats who remain, especially in the Senate, are disagreeing with their urban counterparts. That popped up on firearms legislation, and also there was a proposal this week to ban coyote killing contests or coyote calling contests. And basically, the debate did not fall along party lines really at all. Democrats from rural areas, Republicans from rural areas opposed the ban, and Republicans and Democrats alike from urban areas supported the ban. That's an interesting dynamic that we're going to be watching here in the last few weeks. There are all kinds of things that can trip up a bill. It can be geographic interests. It can be partisan politics. It can be almost anything. But
and I was just in the days ahead, we're kind of looking for more action on the budget bill, guns bills, as Dan mentioned, marijuana bill as well could be on the House floor. So we're going to be busy trying to, drink lots of coffee and bring you the news in the coming days.
And we'll try and coordinate better next time so we're wearing different colored shirts. But if you see one of us, our name is Dan. It's easy to flag us down.